Hi everyone, welcome to this English Literature Q&A with St Catharine's, or Catz as most people call us. Today we've got a few of our Directors of Studies, an admissions tutor and also some current students to answer all your questions about studying English at Cambridge, studying at St Catharine's and the course in general. First of all, let us all introduce ourselves. I'm Kathryn and I'm the school's liaison officer at St Catharine's. Let's go alphabetically to introduce ourselves.
By first name or surname, Kathryn?
First name, obviously. Sorry.
Now I'm going to have to work through and how that works. Okay, I'm Ivan. I'm the admissions tutor in the Arts and Humanities.
Okay, Ivan failed the first test.
I'm Caroline. I'm one of the Directors of Studies in English.
I'm Hester. I'm the other Director of Studies in English, and I mostly teach Shakespeare and early modern literature.
I'm Lucy. I'm a third year, so I'm just about to graduate, and I did papers on Chaucer and Renaissance literature this year.
I'm Seth. I'm also a third year, and I did papers on American literature and visual culture this year.
I'm Una. I'm a second year and about to go into my final year. And studying English.
I'll start off with one of the lovely questions we've had, which is what are the opportunities to get involved in English literature outside of the classroom, such as seeing plays and things like that at Cambridge?
Well, Catz has a society called the Shelley Society, which is a literary society. We meet every Thursday. It's pretty fun. There's wine and poetry, and it's very chill and lovely, and it's been going for a while. So that's one way. There's a big theatre scene in Cambridge, which I know both Seth and Una have been involved with, and maybe they'll have some interesting things to say about it.
Yeah, there's lots of opportunities to see plays and to take part in plays in any form you'd like to take part. There's probably at least 4 plays on every week into venues run by the CUADC, which is the drama club, and then there's also lots of individual venues in college, so you can really get involved at any level, and whether you want to perform or write or be involved in the production side, there's loads of opportunities.
And we also usually organise a couple of theatre trips a year, paid for by the college as well. We usually have at least one London trip a year and go to something locally as well. And I think there's a very lively creative writing scene in Cambridge. I think sometimes people worry that, oh, the university doesn't teach creative writing. Can you really be a writer? And we say, yes, lots of people are writing all the time. And the fact that it's not taught, I think, means that it's a much more diverse creative writing scene, and I think a very supportive creative writing scene as well. So there's huge and very varied opportunities for getting involved in lots of things associated with English literature outside study. And many of the people who are involved with theatre, who are involved with student journalism or involved with creative writing, are not studying English. It's often, I think particularly in the theatre scene, it's something that people are participating in from lots of different subject backgrounds and from all across the different colleges as well.
Thanks everyone. Someone's asked, how is the additional first year critical theory course that's unique to Catz, how is that taught?
So you meet once a week for a 90-minute session, and you read. You're usually given, I think it was usually a couple of pieces or maybe 3 shorter pieces, and it starts with, I mean, someone might have to correct me on this. I think we started with Plato, and then you just work your way through lots of critical theory and through lots of various schools of critical thought, and it's just a 90-minute discussion, pretty amorphous in what you actually focus on, and it's just led by what people are interested in. And it was taught by Caroline, who has just disappeared, and another tutor at Catz called James Lello.
Someone's asked, is there anything else that's different about how Catz teaches English, or is it the same as at other colleges?
I think it's really important that no matter what college you end up at, you're doing the same course. You're sitting the same exams, you're going to the same lectures. What's distinctive about English at Catz? I think we have a very good time. We do a lot of our teaching in-house, which is nice. So Caroline teaches one of the compulsory papers, I teach two of the compulsory papers. The critical theory course is obviously distinctive. The Shirley Society that Lucy talked about is also very much a distinctively Catz thing. I don't know if some of the others would like to chip in as to what's distinctive about Catz English.
I think that that you kind of hear of differences between colleges, and something like critical theory is something that is specifically unique to Catz. But at the same time, that there are like differences that just occur with ways of teaching and the ways like weeks are structured with classes or essays. And obviously all of our experiences are only with Catz, but I think that they are positive experiences. Having tutors, like supervisors like Hester and Caroline are really lovely and supportive and kind of enriching. So it's difficult to say because our experiences are limited to Catz, but we do get like a balanced and really enriching study, I guess.
Yeah, I'm not sure if it's the same at other colleges, but there certainly feels like there's sort of a sense of community among the people who study English, both in individual years and kind of across the 3 years. Like I think the Shirley Society is nice in that regard because you can meet people who are studying it in the years below you. So it's quite it may be the same in other colleges, but it feels like you're really part of a kind of like a small set of people who are doing it, and everybody's quite friendly within that.
Yeah, and I think that's been really crucial in the past term, actually, where we've all been away from each other physically, but we've managed to stay connected virtually. And it's been so helpful that there is a sense of community and a sense of friendliness and kindness and mutual support. And I'm really proud of how everybody's coped with that.
We also sometimes hang out with our most famous English alumnus, Syrian McKellen. Not regularly, but enough to make it a thing. He's very much part of our Catz English identity.
Yeah, I think that was the best part of my job, getting to meet Ian McKellen, and you all, of course, but mainly Ian McKellen. Somebody's asked, do you get the chance to study any foreign literature, so literature in translation into English?
Yes, you do, and indeed you have to. At some point, because the third year tragedy paper, which is one of the ones that I teach, you have to do Greek tragedy as well as Shakespearean tragedy and whatever else, which can often also include things in translation. But the English Tripos is open to the possibility of writing about literary translation as a thing in itself. I don't know if any of the students want to come in and talk about experiences they've had of working on things in translation.
I've not really written much on translation, but I did some very strange alchemist manifestos that were translated from German in last term. And I think it's a very different experience from writing about English literature that was written in English originally, because obviously you're considering different things, because you know that analysing sort of word level is perhaps not the same as it would be if you were writing on something that was originally written in English, because you can't say, oh, the writer chose this word, because they didn't, the translator chose the word. So obviously it opens up a whole range of new possibilities about what analysing English literature and literature in general can be. So there is opportunity for it, and it is interesting, and I'm really glad that the course is open to that kind of thing, because it's an exciting new thing to be doing.
It's also a one of the components of the medieval course, which we take in the first term of first year at Catz, but some other colleges take in the first term of second year. But a part of the exam is to translate parts of Chaucer and Gawain and the Green Knight into modern English from Middle English. So you have translation classes. So that's another little bit of translation that you work on.
A question just about the structure of the English course. Could maybe Caroline or Hester give a brief outline of the English course? I don't know if you can manage that succinctly.
Right, okay. I have to keep a document open on my other screen, so if I'm looking out at this on this side, it's not that I'm going slightly mad, but the structure of the course is about to change from October 2020. And the papers are going to be the same, but the assessment structure is changing slightly. So in your first year at St Catharine's, you would take in the first term the medieval paper, in the second term the Renaissance paper, and in the third term the Shakespeare paper. And alongside those, in fact, in all 3 years of the course, you'd be doing practical criticism and critical practice, which is close reading, literary theory, thinking about what you're doing when you're studying literature, as well as working very closely with reading literary texts. At the end of your first year, you would be examined on practical criticism and critical practice by sitting an exam, and you'd be examined on the Shakespeare paper by submitting a portfolio of essays. Then in the second year, you would take the long 18th century paper and the 19th and 20th century paper and continue going with practical criticism and critical practice. And then at the end of the second year, you would be examined on the medieval paper, the Renaissance paper, the long 18th century paper, and the 19th, 20th century paper. But of those 4, you would replace one of them with a dissertation. And that's a bit of a change to the structure that everybody else that you can see on your screen has been examined under. So those first 2 years, which helpfully we call Part 1, or Part 1A, Part 1B, medieval, Renaissance, Shakespeare, long 18th century, 19th and 20th century, practical criticism and critical practice. Very historically based, but within those that quite rigid structure of papers, almost no set texts. It's a very flexible course in terms of what you're actually reading and writing on week by week. The idea of that very broad base in the first 2 years is that at the end of those 2 years, you can do anything. It's not like a pathway has been set in your first year, which means that doors are closed to you. You've got a very, very solid grounding across all periods and indeed a very wide area of English literature. And so in the third year, there's what looks much more like a modular system that you'd be familiar with at other universities, where you choose from a menu of optional papers. There are 2 compulsory elements in the third year, practical criticism and critical practice. The tragedy paper, which Caroline has talked about, which is Greek tragedy and Shakespearean tragedy and anything else that you might care to call tragic. And our current students could tell you a bit about the sorts of things that they studied under the rubric of the tragedy paper. You write a dissertation on absolutely anything that you want to. It doesn't replace another paper. And then you choose from this menu of optional papers either 1 or 2 papers. So you can do 2 dissertations, in fact. And those papers are sometimes period-based. So you could do the Victorian paper or the early modern drama paper. They might be author-based. So there's a Chaucer paper. But there are also more thematically based papers. There's a paper called The Medieval Supernatural. There's an American literature paper, the visual culture paper, which Seth did. There's papers on literary theory and criticism, American literature, post-colonial literature. There's a new paper on love, gender and sexuality in the long 18th century. So it's a very varied sort of spread of papers. And as I say, you choose either 1 or 2 of those to do alongside dissertations and the compulsory papers. So that's a kind of very speedy tour through the structure of the English course. I'm very happy to answer more questions, or other people might chip in from the inside, having done it.
Yeah, and just to reinforce what Hester's been saying, I think most people who do the English degree at Cambridge find that the third year is the most fun year, because that's where you're doing the things that you absolutely have chosen to do. But one of the reasons that works so well is because you've had the grounding of part 1, so that you are ready for anything. And I think, as she said, it's really important to stress that this is not a set book course, unlike almost any other English course. in the UK. I mean, Oxford is similar, I guess, maybe some other places, but most English courses have a pretty set curriculum, and the freedom to explore is one of the things that initially people can find challenging because it's so different from what you've been doing at school, but which they actually come to love. Yeah.
And I would just add, on the kind of week by week basis, there's like you're very free to explore things, and you're also free to choose like how you will write about certain texts. So most of the time you will choose your own essay title. Sometimes in medieval term we were set a title we had to like, or a set, like maybe, but even then you might get like 5 or 6 questions that you could choose one of and explore, and they'll often be quite broad, so you can include lots of different texts. So it's not the experience of like everything is like set for 1 year and then it opens up. It's like from the beginning you can kind of, you know, put your own spin on things and choose things that you enjoy, which is like, so it doesn't, it's not like it's not closeting in any way. It's quite open from the start, even though you're doing specific modules.
You mentioned Shakespeare in the first year. Someone's asked, they are a big Shakespeare fan, so it's not a criticism, but why is studying Shakespeare considered to be such an important foundation for English Lit students at Cambridge?
Well, how long have you got? I suppose one of the things that I really value about doing Shakespeare in the first year is that Shakespeare is often something that people feel quite confident about, and therefore it's an opportunity to explore lots and lots of different approaches. And so it's often when people are working with Shakespeare that they feel more enabled to explore lots of different critical perspectives, and try out different ways of writing, different ways of thinking. So one argument for the centrality of Shakespeare would be because it's always been that way. Actually, I don't think that that's something which has stayed still at all. And I think Shakespeare teaching now is often the place where people really take off in terms of finding their own critical perspectives and writing essays in different ways, trying out different approaches, writing about performance. It's one of the most varied and I think exciting ways of teaching and of working together as well. And it's an opportunity to get to grips with almost everything. So when we're doing the Shakespeare paper, we would be doing 2 or 3 plays a week. We're not spending a term working on one play. It's much more, what do I think about Hamlet because I'm reading Hamlet this week? What do I think about King Lear because I'm reading King Lear this week? And that experience of working both in depth and breadth through the works of a particular writer, I think is very exciting and also very foundational as an approach, that experience of absolutely being saturated in the works of a particular writer very intensively is something which pays huge dividends. So that's some answers to why Shakespeare is so central.
Thanks, Hester. A few people are asking about how it works with the teaching, how much teaching takes place inside the college, how much outside of the college. So perhaps one of the students could kind of say what a typical week looks like in terms of seminars, supervisions, lectures, and whether these take place in the college or outside of the college.
Yeah, so for your first 2 years, which is like the part 1 part of the course, you kind of have, so if you're studying medieval, for example, for the whole term, in that term each week you'd probably have a class in which you'd probably discuss kind of just general thoughts about what's been being like read and led by one of like your supervisor at the time, with everyone else who does English in your college, so a group of like 6 to 8 of you, and then towards the end of the week you'd have a supervision in which you'd kind of have prepared an essay for and handed in the day before probably, and that you can discuss in depth either 1-on-1 or 2-on-1 with that same supervisor. discussing your essay, your supervisor and your supervision partner's essay, and also just any other general thoughts you had. And on top of that, lectures kind of run alongside college teaching, but they're not like working together, if that makes sense. So lectures are optional in a way that you choose which lectures you find interesting, or have an interest in what the lecturer is talking about in that whole lecture series, or specific lectures within that. So you go to them for kind of exploring different avenues, maybe things you hadn't thought about, rather than kind of, it's not directly informing your weekly essays, but it's just alongside and can also sometimes be really useful.
Thank you. Someone's also asked about, are your supervisions in Catz, are they always with Catz fellows, or are you sometimes having supervisions with fellows from another college? So if the supervision is about something outside of their specialised subject area, for example.
Yeah, so you have supervisions, you'll usually have the same supervisor for the whole term on the particular paper you're doing, but it's not always in Catz. Like Hester supervised us for Renaissance and Shakespeare, and we had supervision from Caroline for tragedy, but we also had supervision, we had a different supervisor each term for practical criticism, and it's just kind of whoever has a speciality in it, you tend to go to that person, and it broadens out as well in third year. Although it depends what papers you're doing. In my papers in third year were both taught outside of college, but I know Material Renaissance is taught in Catz by Hester, so it really depends on what you're studying. But you do have the supervisor, or you may have two supervisors in the case of medieval, but they'll be constant for the 8 or 9 weeks of the time you're studying that.
It's perhaps a difference between the Cambridge system and the Oxford system, and that in Oxford you're still much more likely to have much more of your teaching within your college. In Cambridge, we tend to do a lot more swapping around, so that you are being taught by somebody whose research interests usually, although not always, centrally align with the teaching that they're doing. If I were in Oxford, I would be having to teach up to 1800, which is a terrifying and appalling thought. Fortunately, I can stop at about 1642 and everything is okay in the system that we run here. But everybody who teaches at Catz is also teaching for other colleges, and so we do a lot of exchange teaching, a lot of swaps, and particularly when it comes to finding dissertation supervisors or supervisors for Part 2 optional papers, we'll be thinking, who would be the expert for that? Who would be a really good fit for that subject, that essay, that dissertation topic, that optional paper? But also who would be a really good person to work with this particular student? So we try to set up good partnerships for those kinds of work as well.
Thank you. We've got a few more admissions questions, which I believe Ivan wants to answer, so I'll let you read those up and answer those.
Okay, I'll start, and my colleagues and people can jump in. Around how many books should we actually put on our personal statements? So I'm afraid I can't give you a short answer to that one, so I'm going to have to give you a very long one. I think the way you should think about it is, what are you using your personal statement for? And broadly speaking, you are using it to demonstrate your interest in the subject. You're planning on undertaking a 3-year degree. Especially if you come to Cambridge, you're going to have to work relatively hard. So what is going to sustain you through that? What is your interest? Why are you committing to this? I'll give you, from an admissions tutor's perspective, a few things to avoid. You want to avoid writing long lists of books that you probably have, well, possibly have not read. And if you have read them, you might have only glanced at them. And the reason, because especially at Cambridge, is we have admissions interviews, and anything you write down in your personal statement is fair game as far as we're concerned. So you want to make sure that if you have written about it, you want to be ready to be able to talk about it. But also, simply writing a list of books that you have read doesn't really show us anything in any great depth. My advice would be to more than one, and probably fewer than 10, I think. Fewer than 10 because writing about books is an opportunity to tell us what you think about them. We're not just looking for reading, but the ability to think and read critically. So when it comes to the arts and humanities, it's not just a case of just listing books. It's also a case of trying to tell us a little bit about what you thought about them. And so we want to see evidence and elements of that analysis and critical thinking. So I think somewhere between 1 and 10 would be my advice. Maybe 3. 3 is always a good number, right? We like to deal in trilogies and triads. Maybe Hester and Caroline would like to chip in at this point.
Yeah,
in terms of reading.
We like to hear about what you've been reading, but I think of it as preparing for a conversation. You're going to have a conversation with your interviewers. What books would you like to talk about? What subjects relating to them do you want to talk about? It's a chance to set things up so that we can have a really interesting and productive conversation.
And there's no magic book list. People sometimes worry that they should put something really, really impressive sounding in their personal statement. You're not expected to have done a degree in English in order to apply to do a degree in English. So evidence that you're reading well outside what you're doing at school is useful, but also that you're thinking about what you're reading, that you might have some kind of program for what you're reading. But don't try to second guess what you think we will be most impressed by, because that will inevitably backfire and you'll feel uncomfortable about it. Would far rather that you had some things that you were really genuinely interested in and that you could talk about thoughtfully and excitedly. We get excited about books, so we'd like to hear about books that excite you as well. Thank
you. So I've got a few more on that.
Can I add one thing to that of like in the interview, your all the myths about like getting asked terrifying questions or really weird questions or like mind-boggling questions are not true and will certainly not happen at Catz. And you just get asked like about the books you've read and there's no attempt to catch you out. It's just to try and make sure you're showing your best self. So don't worry about like reading any of those, like what they're going to ask you in the Oxbridge interview, because it's not true. They'll just ask you honest questions about the books you've written down. So just be prepared for that, but don't be prepared for any kind of weird tricks because they don't happen.
So in relation to that, we have another question, which is how much importance do you put on each part of our applications? So we look at your application holistically. That means Hester, Caroline and I will look at everything. We will look at GCSEs, although there are no GCSE requirements. There's another myth out there that unless you have straight A stars at GCSE, there's no point applying, and that's very much not the case. But we will look at that to see how your past academic performance has been. We will look at predicted grades for A levels, because one of the important things is your potential to achieve A star AA. That's the conditional offer in English. So we will be looking for that. We will read your personal statements. We've already talked about a little bit about what you might put on it. We've got a few more questions relating to that in a bit, so I'll expand on that then. We will look at your school references, and you will have the ELAT, the pre-interview assessment, and we will have your interview performance. And no single part of that will make or break your application, although we are looking for the potential to, and you will have to fulfill your conditional offer, meet A star AA. But there's again this perception that the interview is the last hurdle and that you have to pass that in order, and that's not the case. We will then look at those different components, and then Hester, Caroline and I will sit down at the end of all that and look at all those different bits of information to build up a picture about all our applicants. So there's no single part that we value more than any other, but at the end of the day, because the offer is A star AA, that's probably one of the more important parts. But we will look at all those others, and we have contextual information as well about socioeconomic background, the type of school that you go to, that we will also use in our decision making. So lots of questions about personal statements. In terms of personal statement content, would it be recommended to focus more on the content of the English course, for example, medieval literature? And then people talk about what would you recommend doing over the summer holidays to improve the chance of success when applying, and what proportions should we write our personal statement in? How much should we talk about extracurriculars? All right, so we're getting lots of questions. First thing to say, personal statements don't matter quite as much for Cambridge as they do for other universities you might be applying to. The reason being, we have admissions interviews, which allow us to gain information about you. As a general rule of thumb, we recommend 80-20, so 80% on curricular and super-curricular things, and 20% on extracurricular. But again, having said that, there is another, we're talking about lots of myths today. One of the other myth is of the well-rounded Oxbridge applicant, and this idea that it's only worth applying if you sing in the choir, have straight A's at GCSE, play county cricket, and probably a future Nobel Prize winner or something like that. This is, as an admissions tutor, I don't care what you do in your extracurricular time. I don't care if you play any sport or not. I don't care if you sing or not. I don't care if you help grannies cross the road or not. All those things are immaterial when it comes to your performance. But as a general rule for universities, they like to see as a kind of 80-20% split. So that might guide you, but don't feel bad if you don't have a whole string of extracurriculars to write about. It really won't affect your application. But in terms of the 80%, things you might write about are the things that you enjoy currently at school. And again, why? It's not just a game of listing things, it's telling us a little bit about yourself. So what is it that you enjoy doing at school? And how is it that you extend your interest in your subject beyond the classroom? And that's where your super-curriculars, and especially for English, this is where your reading comes in. I think that's it. That's my diatribe.
I was just going to quickly say, I'll pop in the chat to all attendees a link to a really useful guide to writing personal statements, which was produced by the Cambridge University Students' Union last year, approved by the admissions office. And it's really handy for seeing kind of in depth the things that Ivan was talking about, how to write about your wider reading and things like that, and breaking down some of the myths about Cambridge personal statements.
I think on the idea of like what to do in your summer holidays and kind of what can I do to prepare, I suppose like the summer holidays are a perfect time to kind of think about what you are interested in outside of what you've learned at school, whether that's like kind of bouncing off something you learned at school and didn't ever have time to actually look into, or something completely different that you wish you were learning at school and haven't had the opportunity to. I think you have like a holidays like ahead of you now, and I think if you start thinking about what you are interested in, I think that is what they really want to see on your personal statements or in your interviews, things that you thought about yourselves and like went out and kind of sought out and read just because you were interested in it and like would be happy to talk about it with them as well. But yeah.
I think maybe a general, I'm not sure if this would be endorsed, but I think like a general rule is probably like depth more than breadth, in terms of like it's better to, if you're really interested in one author, like read lots of their work rather than trying to read like, you know, the top 100 novels that have ever been written. Like it's just more fun as well to kind of get to know an author and get to know what you like about them and what you don't like about them. So don't feel like you need to find a list of like the best books and read them all. Just follow your own fascinations, and that will be the best way to do it.
And I think also don't feel that you have to, again, second guess the sorts of things that the people that are interviewing you might be particularly interested in. You know, if you look at my research interests or Caroline's research interests and then think, well, I've got to write a personal statement that tailors itself to these particular interests. No, really don't. And again, it comes back to, you don't have to do a degree in order to apply to do a degree. We know that most people will have done very little pre-19th century literature. They'll probably done no medieval literature at all. So think about where your gaps are over the summer. Maybe start to think about how you might go about filling one or two of those gaps. But we all have gaps. We have lifelong gaps. We're all playing catch up on our reading all the time. And again, it comes back to being thoughtful about what you're reading, having a sense of why you're going to read next, what you're going to read next, and what you might read after that, rather than thinking, oh, I've got to read this because there might be a very good because. But in order to impress somebody who seems to be working on that in their own research is not a good reason to read something.
On a similar note, we've had a question about how useful is the EPQ, so that's Extended Project Qualification, on something related to English for strengthening an application.
We'd never include an EPQ in an offer. I think the EPQ is a really valuable thing to do if it's allowing you to follow your nose, if it's allowing you to do something independent, to set up and follow through a project. But if you're just doing it because your school thinks that it's a good thing to do, to tick a box, then it's almost neither here nor there. It's the sort of thing that we'd be interested to hear about at interview, but particularly to hear about why you chose to do the sorts of things that you did, how you went about it, what most interested you about it, what you learnt from it. But it would never be part of an offer.
Thanks, Hester. A question for the students. Seeing as you don't get taught outside the college very often, I assume they mean kind of in the small group sessions, how easy is it to meet English students from other colleges?
Pretty easy, to be honest. There's lots of extracurricular activities that you might have in common with other English students, and also other non-English students, which apparently do also exist. And you can meet people in lectures, you can meet people in societies, and also when you start going further along your degree, you might get supervised with people in other colleges. It's pretty easy. The college is not some sort of kind of awful barred institution that you can't get out of except when they release you for your 9 a.m.s every morning. It's not like being at school really at all. It's just the place where you happen to live mostly, and it's pretty easy to meet, in my experience, it's pretty easy to meet students from other colleges, both English and non-English students.
I think that's generally true in pretty much all aspects of Cambridge life. You can elect to spend more time in college life and get more involved in college specific societies and like spend more time generally in the college, or you can spend more time out of the college, and either approach is completely fine. And it doesn't really, it's as Lucy said, it doesn't like restrict you in any way. You can just either take advantage of it or take advantage of the things outside it, and it doesn't.
Thanks. We've got a few questions about the different stages of the application process. So firstly, how does the ELAT work, and how important is this to the overall application? So I think Ivan's talked about kind of how that fits in, how we look at it holistically, but perhaps you could explain how the ELAT works.
So the ELAT is, I mean, it's a while since we did it, but the ELAT is, you get, I think it's 8 texts. You'll probably take it in your school, just sort of in a free period or something. I think that's how we did it. You get like 8 texts that are all on a vague theme. I think ours was storms or tempests or something. Then no more than sort of 2/3 of an A4 page each. And it just says, compare 2 or 3 of these in any way that you find interesting. I think that's the sort of rubric of it. And you can just do what you like with it, really. I think the important thing to remember about the ELAT is that it's skills that you already have from doing A-level English or even GCSE English. They're skills that you have already got. That's close reading, reading in detail and analysing what you've read, and comparing as well. That's obviously a big thing between 2 different texts, or I don't even know if you have to compare. I'm not sure. But basically the headline is it's fine. Don't worry about it. You don't have to write reams and reams either, just a sort of sensible amount, however much you think is interesting. And you know, if you think it's interesting, then the examiners probably will as well. So yeah, don't stress about it.
I think it's important to know that we don't have anything to do with the setting or the marking of the ELAT. It's set and marked externally. We get the marks, we get the scripts. At the moment, we haven't used the ELAT for deselection. we could, but at the moment we don't, because it hasn't been around long enough for there to be enough of a correlation and enough years of data for us to see what the kind of correlation might be between a strong score on the ELAT and future performance. So at the moment we treat the ELAT like any other piece of information that we get. It's another data point. It's a good point of comparability across all candidates, but it's not something to, as Lucy says, don't get stressed out about it, because it's just another thing. And particularly if your school is making you do lots of practice papers, do them, but don't get stressed out about it, please. It's just another thing.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, as Hester says, there is no quantitative threshold that we look at. So there is no score that you have to get above. We don't currently use it for deselection. So when we come together and meet, when everybody's done their interviews and we look at everything, it's one of the things that we will look at, but we won't place that much emphasis on it. So to reiterate, don't stress about it too much.
Yeah, we used to have a written test of our own that we would get all candidates to sit, and it replaces that part of the process. It's another piece of information, and it's useful to have somebody else's opinion that this is something that we haven't set and marked ourselves.
We've had a few questions about interviews. So firstly, are the interviews going to be different this year? That's probably a question for Ivan. And then in general, however the interviews look this year, what kind of happens in an interview, and what was it like for the students going through that experience?
Okay, I'll just jump in from a general perspective. Oxford have announced that they have moved and will be moving fully online. The University of Cambridge hasn't quite finalised its plans yet, but because of COVID, we will be avoiding as much as possible inviting people to be interviewed in Cambridge. And how exactly that's going to work with the specifics of interviewing people online, we are still figuring out, and we'll announce details as soon as we have them. So that's the general perspective. I'll let the DOSers and everybody else talk about the specifics of an English interview, because I have no clue.
So at Catz, we had 2 interviews, one with Hester and one with Caroline, and one other person with them as well. And before, like a half an hour before the first interview, you receive like a poem or 2, and you can read it over and have some thoughts about it, which will be asked about. And then also in the interviews, you'll be asked about essays that you hand in, like your school essays you hand in, and your personal statement, and kind of other general questions. It is a way more kind of interesting and kind of fun experience than you might expect it to be. It seems like it would be really intimidating and scary, and I can understand why, but as we kind of have said before, it is just a conversation, and they do just want to gauge like what your interests are, and are really open to like having a discussion about that with you. So I think as long as you put things that you're comfortable with in your personal statement and things like that, you'll be as comfortable as you can be talking about them. And yeah, there are no trick questions, and it is just a very friendly and inviting space, and kind of replicates what a supervision would be like when you arrive at Cambridge as well. So when you'd be discussing things with your supervisors, which is like quite an important part of the teaching at Cambridge. So it's kind of just a preliminary version of that, and it is it isn't as scary as it may seem, and but yeah.
I think also, I'm not sure if this is, I've heard from other people in other colleges that they've had slightly scarier experiences, but I know specifically for Catz, it is like pretty overwhelmingly known as a very friendly college in very many ways. And I think the English department is certainly one of those. So you definitely won't have a bad experience at Catz. I mean, there may be more scary academics at other colleges. I mean, I would doubt it, but at Catz, definitely it will be pretty nice.
I think one of the things about the interview too is that because you've written your personal statement, and because you're working with a poem that's been given to you in advance of the interview, and because you've sent in some ordinary schoolwork which is going to be discussed, actually you know a lot of what's going to happen in those two interviews. There aren't a lot of unknowns. You don't know the questions that you're going to be asked about your essay that you've sent in, or about the poem that you're going to read, but you kind of know the general area. And so having a sense that you know what is going to happen, broadly speaking, in those two interviews, I think is really important. It's not two 25-minute sessions of complete unknownness that's about to hit you. Nobody is going to shine bright lights in your eyes or set fire to you, or interview you while sitting under a table. No, just no.
Yeah, I think...
Sorry, go ahead, Caroline.
I think what Una said about this being a kind of preparation for what a supervision would be like is a really helpful way to think about it. And one thing that's useful in advance of the interview is to look at the schoolwork that you sent in and reread it so that it's fresh in your mind, because sometimes people don't do that, and then it's more difficult to have a conversation with them about a piece of work that they might have done several months ago because they don't remember it. So I think, you know, there are sensible things you can do to prepare, and that's one of them. But I think, yes, it's a conversation. It's the kind of small scale conversation that we would try to have with you as a student at Cambridge, and we're having a small version of that with you as an interviewee.
I suppose the only way you could prepare in a small way is if you make any kind of critical assertions, or like write up any opinions about any books that you've written on in your personal statement. Maybe just think about a way that you could support them. Like if you say like Shakespeare is awful, think about how you might support that as I mean, don't say that, but if you have an assertion, just think about how a question that might be asked about it. But yeah, other than that, there's not really much that you need to think about.
I think it's perfectly normal to feel nervous before interviews, but I think most people would agree that afterwards you're kind of like, oh, that was not what I was expecting, and I thought it was going to be scary. But I mean, it's you having a conversation about books that you're passionate about and topics that you're passionate about with nice people like Hester and Caroline, who are also passionate about their subjects, getting the chance to experience what Cambridge teaching might be like. So hopefully that shouldn't sound too horrific. I think that sounds like something really nice. I might just apply to English to do that. Caroline, you mentioned submitted written work, and someone's asked how many school essays do they have to submit? So maybe you could. Yeah,
for this year, we've normally asked for 2, but for this year we want to ask for 1. And we say, please don't send coursework, but we like to see marked work. It's really helpful to know what kind of advice and criticism you're getting at school, and it should be on something that you're studying, preferably not just an unseen analysis, because that doesn't tell us as much. So something that gives us some idea of how you're engaging with your studies. Hester, do you want to add or subtract or say something different?
I think yes to all of that. Also, again, a bit like the personal statement, if you've got a choice of things to send in, and you might not have, and that's fine, something that you'll enjoy talking about, and something that's as recent as possible that you'll enjoy talking about. It doesn't have to be your shiniest work. It doesn't have to be something that's covered with lots of ecstatically ticked AOs. It might be something that's a bit rougher around the edges, but you thought, yeah, I really enjoyed writing that. I got my teeth into that. It's just another thing for us to be able to discuss with you, and to see, perhaps, have you changed your mind since you wrote it? You know, what do you think about Hamlet now? Have you finished that unit of work? If you were going to go back to it, what would you do differently? Those are the sorts of questions we might ask you about submitted work.
So someone's asked for our kind of typical offer that we set, or for the conditional offer, A star AA. Does the A star need to be in English?
Not necessarily. It's another one that doesn't have a sweet short answer, I'm afraid. It can be. It really depends on the sorts of A-levels that you're applying with. Obviously, to thrive on the course, you'll need a certain set of skills, which will involve writing a lot and reading a lot. And therefore, for example, if you're applying, let's say, with English, art, and music, it's quite likely that the A-star would have to be in English there. So it depends, but not necessarily.
Someone's asked, if you find a particular topic at school interesting, but you then read more and expand your knowledge on this subject, using it as a springboard, can you base your personal statement on this, or should it be something that's not related to your school curriculum at all in your personal statement?
I think it's absolutely fine to do that, to use something that you've read at school or encountered at school as a springboard and then talk about that in the personal statement. I think the main thing is that whatever you're talking about in the personal statement is your interest, whether that's something that school has started for you or that you've encountered in some other way.
Maybe like a useful exemplar of a way, like a paragraph I had in my personal statement that kind of sort of did that, is that I enjoyed reading Dostoevsky, and then I did my EPQ on it, and then I wrote about what I read after my EPQ, and then I tried to connect that to some other reading that I'd done, and like my reading of King Lear. So that was like a, you know, something I enjoyed reading, something I decided to work on in school, and then what I expanded on in terms of my interest in Russian literature after that. So it was like a sort of 3-stage thing, and I think that was fine.
I don't know if you'll know the answer to this, but how much does the Cambridge English course differ to the Oxford English course? Does anyone have any experience with Oxford? I'm assuming then that we don't really know. I mean, what I would say, if you're trying to decide between the two universities, do have a look on the websites, and you can see the full course breakdown. Sorry, Lucy, did you unmute yourself? Were you about to answer that?
Yeah, I don't know loads about it, to be honest, but I know that in Oxford, they will make you read older things. They will make you read things in Old English, which you do not have to do, although you can do at Cambridge. I think that is a big difference between the two courses. Old English is pretty unlike English as we know it now. So it's kind of, that's quite a different experience, I think, about going to Oxford. But I think the courses are pretty different. And I think at Oxford you have to specialise a little bit sooner than you do at Cambridge as well. And it's definitely worth looking in detail at both courses and deciding which actually suits you better. There's a kind of Oxbridge as a concept, I think, is a little bit of a myth when it comes to the English course. Obviously the teaching style is quite similar, but the courses are fairly different, and it's definitely worth having a look at the two courses in quite a lot of detail and thinking which of these is actually right for me, if either, because, you know, there are also lots of other amazing English courses in the UK and around the world, which are also really good and really different, and all English courses are different. So wherever you're applying, definitely look in detail and see if the course is actually really right for you.
Thanks, Lucy.
In Oxford, the examination structure is also slightly different, in that there are no second year exams in Oxford. At the moment, they have exams at the end of the first year and exams at the end of the third year. And the system that we're just about to go to will have a small assessment at the end of the first year, larger assessment at the end of the second year, quite a lot of assessment at the end of the third year. So again, it's a slightly different rhythm to the course.
A couple of last questions before we end the session. I'm not sure whether you'll know the answer to this. Please could you give me an idea of the percentage of degrees awarded as firsts or 2-1 or 2-2, etc.? I mean, I'm assuming that depends on who the students are each year and what they get, but I don't know if you have any comment on that, Hester or Caroline or Ivan.
It changes every year, and I think this year is anomalous. I think the university for English fluctuates between about 25 and 30% firsts. It's more than it used to be, as people will always tell you, usually in desperately kind of doom-laden tones, and talk about grade inflation. Yeah, lots of people get firsts, lots of people get excellent 2-1s, some people get 2-2s. Thirds are very unusual these days, very, very unusual. 2-2s are quite unusual. But yeah, about 25 to 30% would get firsts in a year that was not this year.
That's pretty standard across most subjects, actually, these days, those sorts of percentages.
Someone's asked, how diverse are the texts studied?
I mean, as Hester said, or was it Caroline? Someone said right at the start, there basically aren't really set texts. So you can range far and wide to very, very diverse, or you can stick with writing a lot about Shakespeare for not your whole degree, but there is a certain amount of freedom there. I think Cambridge is really trying to work on how diverse its teaching is. There's room to do a lot more there, but it's definitely every year is getting better in terms of what's taught, what's lectured on, what we're given on reading lists, that sort of thing. But there is room to move, and hopefully increasingly so.
This brings us to our last question, perhaps quite specific, but how would you incorporate talking about a 4th A-level in your personal statement, or perhaps just even an A-level that isn't English? If you want to talk about a way that you've linked it to English, would that count as something that you could talk about in your personal statement? Would that be curricular, or would that be extracurricular, or what would be your advice on talking about? So for example, in this, a subject like art, where they perhaps decide to talk about Shakespeare's role in art and make that to do with English, how would you advise talking about that in a personal statement?
Coming at this slightly sideways, we realise that lots of people who are applying for English are probably applying for different degree courses elsewhere, and they're applying with the same personal statement. So we're used to reading personal statements where people are trying to keep a number of different objectives in play. If you are applying for English, but you know that you are also really passionately interested in history or in French, or your study of maths or further maths has really changed how you do English, then tell us about it. That's an interesting intellectual exercise to put yourself through, to think about those connections, to think about how everything that you've studied is informing and shaping everything else. I think particularly with 4th A-levels, you don't have that many characters to play with. And that's something that we might ask you about at interview, even if it's not in your personal statement. We're seeing your whole record, we're seeing your reference, and we'll ask you, how is doing biology making you a better potential student of English literature? What's it bringing to the party? I think you can't do everything in your personal statement. And so, as Ivan said right at the start, it's very much about telling us why you want to do a degree in this particular subject. And there's lots and lots of different ways of doing that.
And just to add a little bit to that, remember for Cambridge, you also have a supplementary questionnaire that you can fill in. And there's a little box where you can expand and have a mini personal statement where you have a chance to talk about the particulars of the Cambridge course, for example. So that's, if you are targeting specifically English at Cambridge and other subjects elsewhere, that's where you might have a chance to talk a little bit more about English there. But as Hester said, don't try and, it's not a tick boxing exercising. That's the general thing we want to get. It's not a tick box exercise in terms of listing lots of books, and it's not a tick box exercise in terms of trying to shoehorn everything into your supposed love for English and why you want to do a degree. Just be honest. I think there's a lot of gaming that tries to happen here, gaming the system as if there's some sort of trick to doing this, and there isn't. The personal statement is an opportunity for you to signal your interest as it is and as it's going to be. So just worry about that, and don't worry about making every single thing connect up to your choice, because you don't have enough words, and think it's going to be impossible in many cases. So just be honest about why you want to do the subject, about what you're reading and what you think about it, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, echoing that, there is no magic. There's no magic list of books to read. There's no magic way to do a personal statement. The person that we want to meet is you. You know, we want to meet you on paper. We want to meet you through the interview process. So be honest, be yourself, and tell us what you're really interested in.
Thanks very much, everyone. That brings us to the end of our questions and the end of the session. Thank you so much for joining us, all our panelists, and thanks to our attendees for taking the time out of whatever you were up to for the rest of the day. We really hope you found this useful. If there's anything you'd like to ask us later and you're regretting not asking during the session, then feel free to email our admissions office and we can forward any questions on to our lovely directors of studies and students and admissions tutors as well, if there's anything for them to answer. So best of luck with your applications in the future. Thanks very much, everyone. Bye.